And our last gold sponsor, but definitely not least, with Recognize and Rise, Virginia Hobbs is the executive director, and she was tremendously helpful in Virginia, in organizing this panel, which is amazing. And we'll get to the panel here shortly. Virginia.
It's going to be really quick. Hi, good morning. I'm Virginia Hobbs, and I'm with the Mental Health Connection. And first of all, I want to thank Fort Worth Report for shining the light on such an important issue as mental health, as well as the Women's Public Forum. I am so excited to become part of that. I have not been that, so I've got people like signing me up, so I'm excited about that. So just a quick overview of what Recognize and Rise is. Sonia's going to be talking about it later, but it so fits in to exactly why we're here today. Because what we know is that the population that we tend to focus on as mental health providers are those people that know that they need help and are trying to get it. But what we also know is that if we can go further upstream and educate and create awareness around folks, that helps reduce stigma around trauma and adversity, and starting thinking about resilience and what that looks like in mental wellness, that the more we can do this way, it helps reduce all the pressure that service providers have because everybody's not doing anything until they're in a crisis situation. And that's what Recognize and Rise is about. It's about increasing awareness and understanding the impact of trauma adversity, which reduces the stigma. And we do that in kind of three basic ways. One of the ways we do that is social media, which I know what SEO is now. I know it's something that's really important, and so we do it by social media. We have a website where there's quizzes, there's videos, there's a lot of ways for people that think, what we want to do is we want to reach the people that are like, and have them explore what this means. We do that with the website. The other way that we do that is we've got some efforts on the ground, some mobility on the ground, and we have just finished training a group of folks from Stop 6 area that have been trained in trauma and adversity and what that means in terms of the impact on the body and the family and all. And their job is to go into their community with our support and help their circle of folks in their neighborhood for them to translate what is trauma, what is ACEs, what is the impact it has on you, and explain that in a way that their neighbors can understand. So we're really excited about how that's going to go. The third way is that we do community forums and community presentations, and we bring in experts. And we've got an expert lined up. We're so excited. For February the 28th, I'm looking at Nathan. He's my partner in crime on that. We're so excited. We're bringing in a couple of folks that are researchers and experts on mass shootings and the profile of mass shooters. And the reason that we think that that's important to mental health is because in order to have a comprehensive approach to addressing the epidemic of violence that's going on locally and nationally, we have to look at the mental health and the emotional well-being of the folks that end up in a crisis and don't know what to do. And if we don't understand who they are and where we can intervene, we're just going to be addressing the crisis after it happens. So mark that on your calendar. Here's more about us, and thank you.
Thank you everybody so much, and I want to just briefly thank our other sponsors. All the sponsors make this possible. Southside Bank, Mental Health Connection, Real Estate Council of Greater Fort Worth, and Fidelity Investments. So thank you, everybody. And then I now want to introduce our moderator, Susan Garnett. She's the Executive Director of MHMR. We did some pre-panel discussions about all this, and I'm just really excited to hear this conversation. I know Susan will do a brilliant job, and she will introduce our talented panelists. Thank you.
Certified child psychiatrist and is very active in our community, works at JPS, but is called upon because of her expertise in children. She's worked with foster care, with children who are involved with the kids involved with the juvenile justice system. She covers all things kids, and so we're grateful to have her. Beside her is Diane Davis, who's the Director of Clinical Services for Alliance for Children. And if you don't know Alliance for Children, you should. They're very important in our community. They're our child advocacy center for children who have had complicated and terrible things happen in their lives and are having contact with the criminal justice system. They're the place they go. And so Diane Davis is really instrumental to what happens with those kids. And so she's going to have a lot of expertise for us on that. Next is Manvi Srivastava. Did I get it? Okay, close enough. And so Manvi is going to be a real treat for you because Manvi is a participant in a school-based strategy called the Hope Squad, where young people in school are identified as helpers on campus and then take on the task of helping others in a formal sort of way through a Hope Squad. So she comes to us from Frisco ISD, and we're glad to have her and grateful to her father who graciously brought her over. And the final panelist you see is Michael Steinart. And Michael Steinart is an Assistant Superintendent of Student Support Services with Fort Worth ISD. Michael is a licensed professional counselor, has many, many years of experience with schools and with children and adolescents, and has a great perspective for us on what he's seen in terms of school-based services and what youth need. So we're going to get started and allow each of them to make some comments, and we certainly will have time, I think, for some questions. So if you have questions as we go along, we'll take questions at the end. But I think actually all of our sponsors gave us some really interesting perspective that comes together as we think about what we want to share with the audience. That, you heard Rose talking about our community's focus on babies and giving babies a good start, which really starts with having a healthy mom. You heard Virginia talk about awareness and awareness of the impact of mental health and how to help people become more aware of searching for services. And then I think Dennis really provided us with really this great kind of overview, thinking about all these key kind of items about how we make services readily available for people, how we think about both formal services and more informal supports, how we think about the use of technology, thinking about prevention, thinking about how we reach people at a pre-crisis state. And so I'm going to turn to Dr. Allison, because Dr. Allison, from her vantage point, sees a lot of people who are in crisis and really thinks a lot about how do we not get to crisis. So can you talk a bit?
Good morning, everyone. I first want to start by saying that my heart is really happy this morning to see this many people in the cold and the rain coming together to talk about youth mental health and how we can help the children in our lives to thrive in their environment, whatever adversity, whatever troubles and stressors that they're having. We as the adults in our lives can really intervene and get them on the path to health and wellness. Over my time being a child psychiatrist, I've seen the demand for services go up. Our youth are struggling. They struggle with school, they struggle with bullying, and it's different from when we were kids. If we were bullied at school, we got to go home. We didn't have social media, we didn't have email. The bullying continues through technology now, so they can never get away from it. And it's really stressing them out to the point where they feel like they have no other recourse than to hurt themselves or kill themselves. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 24. That is only surpassed by accidents. I have a 2.5-year-old. And every time I go to the pediatrician, I am told how to toddler-proof my home. Because accidents is number one as far as cause of death. But how many times have you heard about how to prevent suicide in your child or your teenager? We don't talk about it enough. You know, how we can intervene as adults. Our kids are struggling. They feel like they can't come to the adults in their lives to talk about the things that are happening. They're turning to their peers who may be struggling themselves, and that adds more stress. I think also we don't have enough people in the workforce to help the children that are needing services. So I briefly want to talk about the things that JPS is doing in this effort to try to help the kids in our community. With all the school shootings and mass shootings that have happened, our Texas legislature wanted to intervene, and so they earmarked funds for different programs, and I'm just going to talk briefly about 3 that I touch. And so we know we need more child psychiatrists in the community. I think right now there's 1 child psychiatrist for 100,000 children. It's not enough to meet the need, right? And so what JPS has done is we are starting a child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship. So what that is after a physician goes through training for 3 to 4 years in a general psychiatry fellowship, they're able to enter, or residency, they're able to enter a fellowship to specialize in treating children, and that's a 2-year fellowship. We have interviewed 20 candidates, and we have this week submitted our rank list, and so we will start having 2 child psychiatry fellows, and they'll start next July, so July 2023. So we have staff that will dedicate their time to training these individuals, and our hope is that they will continue in the community so we can see more children and help them along their journey. The other 2 programs, we have a Child Psychiatry Access Network where PCPs can call in to get resources, mental health resources, or they can talk to a child psychiatrist to get help with treatment options. And then we also have a program called TCHAC, Texas Child Health Access through Telemedicine, where we coordinate with ISDs in our catchment area, which is Tarrant County, and we have 8 rural counties, where school counselors can refer students that they feel are struggling, and that child can have therapy services, and if they need to see a child psychiatrist for medication management, those are limited touches, but then we have case managers on staff that will refer to the community for ongoing care. So, you know, these are just some things that we're doing to try to help the need of the community.
Thank you, Dr. Allison. So Diane, can you talk a little bit from your vantage point? You serve lots and lots of kids every year, and talk about what you're seeing in the particular areas where your focus is.
Yeah, so I want to echo what Dr. Allison said, and thank you all for being here today. I think it is very encouraging to see so many individuals out here that are interested in supporting our community, our youth and families that we serve, so thank you. I work at Alliance for Children. It's the Tarrant County Child Advocacy Center, and so we see kids that are dealing with trauma and abuse. And so I think what I have seen is an increase in the severity of cases, an increase in the number of cases, but also as they come to our center and to our locations, seeing that sometimes they're already at a higher level of care than what we're able to provide, and so therefore we end up referring them to inpatient or referring them to another agency that can deal with the severity of what's going on for them. And of course, you all know that wait lists are long in everywhere, not just Tarrant County, and so that is a real struggle as well. And it's just, I think we are trying to look at ways that we can see families that maybe we wouldn't normally see because they're in such a dire place, and we do not want them to have to wait 6, 8, 12 weeks before they can get into someplace. So while we might not be always the best resource in that moment. We're trying to do some things to stabilize them till they can get to the place that's going to provide the best care for them. And I think that we are also seeing also the family unit as a whole really struggling, and increased stressors for parents. And when those things are happening, the family dynamic is shifted and impacted. And so if the parents aren't supportive or aren't able to focus on a child's mental health, it's really difficult for the child to be able to do that on their own, right? They can't drive, or many times can't drive themselves to their appointments. We need the parent to be involved in that. We are trying to get the parent to support them and help them through their trauma, but if they're reliving some of their own traumas or some stressors that have occurred over the last 3 years, it's really difficult to do that. And so if our parents aren't supportive or active and involved, then it's really hard to shift and make a lasting impact for that kiddo. So that's really difficult as well. And then I would say, separate from the fact that we've got a lot of challenges going on for our kids and our families, we also have challenges going on for our staff, our frontline worker who are providing this. And that is really also equally difficult and challenging, and something that I'm seeing a lot of as well.
So you've given us a lot to think about as we think about kind of the wide breadth of issues to deal with. So we're fortunate to have Manvi here today, who's a high school student and who is an officially designated helper, which is a great person to have always in a room. So Manvi, can you talk a little bit about what you see in high school, and talk a little bit about what COVID has meant to folks and things like Dr. Allison talked about social media. Talk about some of what you see as you work with other students.
So COVID was like really special to me because when my school opened, it actually opened during the COVID year in 2020. So my freshman year was just really out of whack. I was e-learning for the entire year for my freshman year, and it was very different than if I were to go in person, because I am very introverted, but like staying at home, staring at a screen for like 8 hours a day made me realize I want to socialize more. And not to mention, it's really hard to focus in your own house, especially since your parents are also working from home because of COVID. And so there's a lot of distractors, and I know a lot of friends whose grades have dipped that year because of it's really hard to just do e-learning with all of those distractions. One of the classes I struggled with was math, and math is something you need to apply to your other math classes too, and I'm really like suffering the consequences of that for my math class this year. So COVID has definitely impacted people's like perspective on like how they socialize with others and like how they really care about their grades, because that was definitely a year most students, even if they went in person, definitely struggled because it was just so different, and it changed a lot about how school worked. And social media, like you mentioned, has definitely played a role in mental health. I feel like in some ways it helps reduce the stigma around mental health if it's the right people, and sometimes it glorifies it. I feel like sometimes people don't understand the severity of mental health, like they sometimes take it very lightly, and I personally believe that it should be taken as seriously as physical health. If you would go to the hospital if you like broke your ankle, why wouldn't you go to the psychiatrist if you're not feeling well, you know? And I feel like social media it's both ends of the spectrum. It can either really help with like reducing that stigma, or it can like completely do the opposite effect. And I think that everything that the students go through with school and like home life, there's just so many factors that play in it. I definitely think COVID did not help with that. And trying to recognize those factors, that something might be off with the teenager or with the child, because it definitely also affected elementary students, because even though in my district, teenagers had the choice to go in person for school or stay at home, all of the elementary school kids had to stay at home because COVID would definitely affect them more if they were a younger age. And a really big example actually of how it affected them bad is that like I'm a junior now, and I'm in marching band, so I get to see people of all the grades. And the freshmen that came in this year, that's when their middle school year was affected by COVID. So they didn't have, that's like a really developing age for kids socially. And you can see how it reflects in their age, because some of them really act out of the norm. They aren't the same as like the other 2 classes of high schoolers that I've met because they don't know how to act socially acceptable sometimes. And that's not really their fault because COVID year has just completely changed their opportunity to learn those things. So I think patience is definitely something adults can use to help their teenagers and like help their children, because help is like, it's really different for everybody. It might work for one kid, but it can definitely not work at all for the other kid. And sometimes you just need to be patient to help them go through those hard times.
Thanks, Manvi. You know, not everybody here may be familiar with what a Hope Squad is, so can you talk a little bit about what Hope Squad is?
So Hope Squad is a school-based peer-to-peer youth program that helps students that go through tough times. And it's usually we train students that get nominated into the Hope Squad so that they know how to deal with those type of situations.
And so you probably can all tell how come Manvi got nominated. Thanks to Manvi. So Michael Steinart, who is thinking about schools in a slightly different way than Manvi is thinking about schools from an administrative perspective. Talk about what you've seen here at Fort Worth ISD and things that you guys are putting in place.
So I think, you know, for Fort Worth ISD, we talk about 72,000 plus students, 10,000 employees. We're fortunate in having a really robust student support services division, so more than 400 licensed and other mental health professionals that our job is to be the front line of both identification and support for kids. And so when you shut that system off for the better part of 2 years, and you socially and physically isolate kids during an incredibly important developmental period of their lives, there's some repercussions. And I think during that time, us and other districts did the best job we could in terms of staying academically and socially engaged with our kids. And like Manvi said, we did have the opportunity for some kids to come back. Some kids chose to stay home, but that was still very challenging. And I think in the transition back, particularly with this last year or so, what we've seen is levels of anxiety off the charts, levels of depression off the charts. As Dr. Allison said, the severity and the volume of what we see is just higher than any other year previous to this. And you know, I anticipate that's going to continue for the next several years, because what we've had is really a developmental delay for 72,000 students. And that's not going to change overnight. So in response to that, I think what we're trying to do is shift our systems to not only just reconnect kids with school and address academic learning loss, but reconnect them with medical homes, with mental health homes, dental, visual homes, because we saw so many of the kids that our division in particular works to keep connected to these services. During that time, families just stopped, and for good reason. There was a lot of anxiety and concern about being socially, you know, present with large groups of people, and then care systems changed. So as we come back, we're trying to explore as many creative partnerships as possible. Things like T-Chat with JPS and telehealth. We have telemedicine now in around 60 of our school campuses that our nurses are facilitating. Working with TCU, we recently opened a counseling center in one of our family resource centers in partnership with TCU. But I think the challenge for us that we see is about caring for our workforce, and I think you mentioned that earlier, that those 400 plus student support services professional have a heavy weight to carry in meeting the needs of students. And when they're not well, and when our 5,000 teachers aren't well, it makes it very, very hard to try and meet kids' needs where they're at. And we're seeing, you know, the increase I mentioned with anxiety and depression with our kids is true for our staff as well. The number of mental health crises that we've had to respond to on campuses for staff is significantly higher. And you're dealing with a traumatized group of folks. So I think for us, what we need help with moving forward is workforce development, because we're all competing for the same professionals. We all need them desperately. It's turned into a bidding war for us to get the best people. And public education is not generally a heavily filled coffer, right? So we're not in a great position to outbid others. But the good news is that we've had some new creative partnerships come together, and I think we have the willingness from our partners and inside our organization to do whatever it takes to meet those needs.
So I think you make a really good point about the concerns that our staff all have in their own lives, and then their concerns as parents, as they're all the things that we talk about that parents are struggling with. Many of our staff are parents and are struggling through those things too. We haven't talked as much about the impact of COVID on very young children and on their families and childcare and all of those things. Dr. Allison, I wonder if you have thoughts about families with very young children and where their focus might be right now.
I agree with what everybody is saying in that the child development has stalled because kids that may have gone to preschool, they stayed home during those years, right? And so parents are stressed out because they have to choose, do I send my child to a school or preschool not knowing the effect of COVID, or do I keep them home? But then at the same time, they're needing to work. So are they able to work with their child to make sure that they're developmentally appropriate when they do start school, or do they fall behind? Kids that needed child fine, or if they have like milestones that are delayed, some of those children may have not been identified, and so those delays just continue to fester. And so when they do hit school, they may have behavioral problems, they're disruptive. You know, we get those children in our office for an ADHD eval, and then we have to take all of these other things into consideration as to whether this really is ADHD or if this just is a developmental delay and they need speech therapy, occupational therapy, all these other skills. And then, is that child or that parent able to pay for those other things that they need to get them back on track? And so it is like a huge lift to, you know, when that delay happened because of COVID, and we're working through that right now. And so that's why everybody mentioned working with our community partners, being able to refer, being able to find the resources for that child and that family is so important. And then having the staff available to do those things.
And certainly for our youngest children, childcare, formal childcare is so important so that families can go to work, and that and they do provide a great boost oftentimes for children in language development and social skill development. And yet we know we have a childcare crisis in our community and across our nation, that our childcare workers are living with wages that are so low. It's terrible for their families, and yet if we raise childcare wages, childcare becomes inaccessible for many families because of the cost of it. So we have a challenge that we're just going to have to sort through somehow. We always say that, you know, under each rock there's another rock, and that's kind of what's happening as we're thinking all these kinds of things through. But certainly for very young children, how we support their families, how we help their families access what they need too. I'm sure that, Michael, you see part of one of the great things that Fort Worth ISD did in the development of the Family Resource Centers is say the child is the student is the jumping off point, but we're reaching everybody that needs help in a family, because it takes everybody to keep that kid healthy.
That's right. We've definitely focused a lot on the 0 to 5 population, more so in the last 5 years. We started offering universal pre-K across the city. What we saw after COVID was a decrease in the enrollment in pre-K, despite people saying they need it when we surveyed them. Again, that goes back to that anxiety about jumping back into that sort of an environment. We just got a new Texas Home Visiting Grant that focuses on 0 to 5. So what we know is that the learning loss we saw most significantly post-COVID around math and reading. Math was the most significant loss. And Manvi mentioned that math is one of those things that when kids aren't in school, they don't necessarily use that skill. Reading is a part of day-to-day life, and so we did see some reading loss, but our scores this year show that kids are kind of back to where they were, so we're back to 0. But with math, we're still significantly behind. And so we're focusing a lot of work on reaching families before the age of 3 and preparing them, providing support for school readiness, because what we recognize is so many of our kids don't reach kindergarten or first grade at the educational starting line, right? They're not all at the same spot. and trying to catch up if you're not starting from the same spot is very, very hard. And then throw on top of that developmental and social delays as a result of COVID. It's critical that we continue to focus on that space. For our providers, I think what we need to see is a lot of families did engage in teleservices and they found that helpful. So in some ways, COVID was a benefit. We had families jump into services that maybe wouldn't have prior to, but now there's an expectation that continue to be available. And so from our providers, it presents a challenge where we want to get back to in-person services because we know that connectedness is really important in the kind of work we do. But we also have families that almost insist on having the tele option or hybrid. If I don't feel like coming today, look at the weather outside, I'm going to call in. So that's a shift for us as a workforce to figure out how to accommodate that, even for our youngest kids.
I think that's a really good point. There are just some fundamental shifts that are taking place in the way people access services. One of the things that I hope our audience takes from this is that how connected all of our organizations are with one another. I know at MHMR we work with JPS, we work with Alliance, we work with Fort Worth ISD. These have become the way we work today, which wasn't necessarily the case years ago. It was we were much more inclined to each have our own mission and be focused on our own mission. But today we really work together in different kind of ways. So I want to pause here and see if our audience has any questions for the panel generally or for any panelist in particular. I see a hand up, yes.
Hi. Did you want me to stand up or?
You sound like you're loud enough.
Okay. Okay, so I have a question for, I forgot what your name is, I'm sorry, for the Hope Squad.
Manvi.
So my son, we are in Mansfield, and my son has a friend who is on the Hope Squad there in Mansfield. She was in the Cook Children's podcast. I talked to her a little bit about the fact that you guys are nominated. So that concerns me because are you nominated as a popularity contest? I know that when my son, during COVID, and we had the Hope Squad start, I asked him, I knew who the kids were. We've been going to school with them for years. Are these kids that you would talk to? And he said, no, sometimes they're the problem. So I'm not saying you are, please, you don't seem like the problem, but that concerns me. And also the fact that there should be, are there LGBTQ kids on there? Is it a racially diverse group? Because we know that people of color, kids of color, and LGBTQ are the most likely to hurt themselves and to continue trying to hurt themselves. So that is, and that's not really to you as much as you're the person that does the direction of the Hope Squad. So that's not something I'm necessarily, but those are just kind of some concerns there. The second thing is for the superintendent. And this came up in talking as well, is in Mansfield, they train everyone to have some kind of training about mental health. So that if the Hope Squad says, what is the trusted adult that you would go to here in school, and they say the coach, the art teacher in Mansfield, I don't know if you guys do this, but they are able to go and they don't have the professionalism that they need, but they have enough to keep them, like you were saying, going and stabilized until they get the help they need. However, my son is also on the football team, and he's a weird dichotomy. And he had to approach his coach because he wasn't treating homophobia the same as he was treating racism. So what do we do when the teachers are contributing or not holding people accountable to make it a safe space for our children? So those are...
Okay, you've had some good questions for the panel. So I'm going to start with Dr. Allison, and if we can talk a little bit about issues of diversity and any comments you have about that.
I can talk about this all day, but I'm trying to be brief. There's so many different, issues, and you have brought up a lot of great points for a lot of different things. When it comes to diversity in care, different cultures, they view mental health differently, right? And so when you see people that come into the office, sometimes there are less, people of color, different cultures feel like, oh, you can, pray this away, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, oh, it's not as serious as it may be. And so a lot of times in the office, I do a lot of psychoeducation of mental health and how it can affect our youth and adults. And, being able to reach those populations that may not feel that this is a big deal is really important, and it's a huge part of my job, right? And I feel like as, in the school system, and then, when you're able to touch them as counselors, being able to speak to those things, to really educate parents is really important. I think the flip side of this is the way that I receive referrals, right? And so when I receive referrals through the school system, the same set of behaviors may be treated very differently. I was reading an article a few weeks ago about, disruptive behaviors in specific, where, a white child with disruptive behaviors or aggressive behaviors, they will receive a mental health referral twice, more likely than a person of color. When a student of color has disruptive and aggressive behaviors, they usually get a disciplinary referral. And so that leads to, suspension, or if the aggression is severe, it may lead to, juvenile justice, referrals. And so it leads down that path. And so when we think about that, we need to really be careful to have equity of care. Anyone that is struggling, they should have the ability to have mental health services, because what's underneath that anger and aggression is probably trauma or anxiety and depression. But if you don't get the referral, that assessment will never happen, and those problems will never be addressed. And so I think as us in this room and those of us that treat this population, we need to be aware of that and cognizant of that when you're faced with a child that's struggling.
Thanks, Dr. Allison. I want to do a time check. Who's our timekeeper?
We're at time.
We're at time? Okay, so before we leave, I think I want Manvi, who is really our true expert on kids. It's not that you all aren't experts, but Manvi's our true expert on adolescents. And so Manvi, as you look at this audience of, they probably look like moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas. If they had somebody in their life that they were worried about, maybe the person doesn't have a Hope Squad at their school, but they were thinking about how to reach out to somebody, what would you tell people? What are the things they need to be thinking about as they watch their students, as they love their students, as they want to help their students? What should they know?
So if I mentioned previously, help is different for everybody. If you see a student and they're struggling and you refer them to like a counselor, or like you tell their parents, you need to be patient with them, because sometimes one way of helping, like counseling, it can be not as helpful as if they were to like go to like on a medication alternative. And so I feel like having patience with your student that you know is going through a tough time, because a lot of the times those types of behaviors can't be controlled. I know that sometimes people get really quote unquote lazy with their work. They don't turn in stuff just because they don't feel the motivation to do it. And I think teachers need to also have some sense of leniency. Like if they're not turning in stuff, maybe there is something going on in their home life, instead of just going so quick to be like, why didn't you turn this in? You had a couple of weeks to do this and stuff. So I think patience is the number one thing, and then recognizing that help for a student can take as much as to 2 days versus like months and months on end. So if you ever want to refer a student, just make sure their needs are in place. That's a conversation to have with them if you really do care about their well-being, because it's different for everybody.
So I think Manvi and the rest of our panel have really given us wise words about meeting people where they are and really listening to them and having an understanding of what unique kinds of needs each person comes with and what unique kinds of supports each person might need. I hope you feel good about the kinds of resources that are available in our community, and that while we have an increasing job out in our community, there's also increasing opportunity for people to reach out, and so we're glad that's the case. So I want you all to join me in thanking our panel for their contributions today. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and I know we're going to go on and have additional conversations about mental health today.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. I hate to be the timekeeper on that because I would love to hear more about that. And we are going to hear more, so stay tuned. I just wanted to share, as I listened to all this, and I thought about my biological mother, who had a mental break when I was 2. She spent time in the Kansas State Hospital and was never really in our lives after that. But my older brothers suffered from many of the same issues she did. And we didn't have these conversations then. That's what I want to say. And I think about how much my brother struggled throughout his life and is still struggling. And I just thank everybody here for you being here and caring and trying to have these conversations and trying to make a difference in people's lives. Because I know what a difference it can make. When I was 18, I made 2 dear friends who, through the course of our friendship, I learned that they were outpatients at the Menninger Foundation, which is a world-class psychiatric hospital in Topeka. It's not in Topeka anymore, but anyway. They had attempted suicide, but they received, fortunately, amazing care at Menninger's and went on to live happy, full lives. And that's the difference, that everything that all of you are doing and that everybody here is trying to do. So, and I want to thank them, all of our sponsors, for making this possible. This is really how we at Fort Worth Report exist. This is how all this, what we call active journalism, happens. And I want to point out, Joni Newton's right there in the middle, and she's our Director of Corporate and Community Relations. And she's happy to help you learn about sponsorship opportunities. We'll have candid conversations all next year, including in January, one with our partners at TCU, talking about the barriers to public participation and trying to get people involved in the community. But in the interest of time, we're going to move right into our next session with the Women's Policy Forum. So thank you all so much.